Hi, everyone. Shelly Korean here with SkyPass Foundation. Thank you for your interest in this recording of our Chillin with Chitnis session with Dr. Shilpa Chitnis, movement disorder specialist. We had this session for the first time in person on August 24th, 2022, in partnership with our friends at Belmont Village Senior Living Turtle Creek in Dallas, Texas. We had a great turnout. We had a full house of eager attendees ready to learn about Parkinson's. We did, however, run into some technical issues when trying to capture this recording, so please pardon any disruptions in audio. We managed to capture a good chunk of it with no problems, but some portions have been removed due to the poor quality of the recording. So when we start off, we are starting off at the point where Dr. Chitnis is talking about how she got into the field of movement disorders, and then she goes on to discuss the history of Parkinson's, as well as share with us some do's and don'ts of living with Parkinson's as it pertains to diet, lifestyle, medication, all that good stuff. And of course, she addresses some audience questions from those who attended live. So we hope you enjoyed this recording. And of course, if there's anything that we can do for you, please reach out to us at skypassfoundation.org. Thanks again. Here is Dr. Shilpa Chitnis.
The next day, like literally my rotation was movement disorders. And I saw a lot of patients with Parkinson's and just fell in love with it. And it was just like, oh my God, like it was like an awakening, And then many years later, another realization hit me because my mother's mother, which is my maternal grandmother, actually had Parkinson's, and my father's mother, which is my paternal grandmother, had Alzheimer's. So I had like two, because a lot of times, when medical students write these essays about why I want to be a neurologist, I want to go to movement disorders, they start from, my grandfather had Parkinson's, and I saw, and it was not like that for me. I think I was kind of late to the party, but I think the revelation that, maybe God or universe or whoever you believe in kind of picks you to do certain things. And I think Parkinson's really has been, for the last 20 plus years, my true calling. It's a disease that I absolutely love and absolutely hate, and for all the reasons. But I think there is a lot of good, and so when we, Victor and Shelly and I got together, there are a lot of foundations, as there is Michael J. Fox Foundation, and there is Davis Finney, and all of these people focus on I think Michael J. Fox really focuses on research because Michael J. Fox really wants to find a cure for Parkinson's, which would be awesome, which would put me out of business, which means I can safely be on a beach in Bahamas. But until that time, we kind of have to so what I was telling them is there's a lot we can do for the community with Parkinson's. It doesn't have to be finding a cure or raising money for, we can basically actually be real. Like we can be with the people, support them, educate them. So that's where our webinars are good. If we can fund some, free exercise classes, if we can pick up, and myself being a movement disorder doctor, the challenges I face is like, oh, it's 3 o'clock and, or rather it's 3:15 and your 3 o'clock has not shown up yet. And then they say, why don't you call them? Because a lot of these patients are older and sometimes they fall sick and then you call and they say, oh, my ride couldn't bring me, to your clinic. And then, then my next appointment is 5 years later because I'm that busy, and then the poor patient can get in, right? So Shelly and I came up with this idea that, even if we could pick a few people, bring them in. So I think that the goal of our foundation, our endeavor here is really community service for patients with Parkinson's. We want to support everybody. We want to empower people. I think education is true empowerment, and the more that we know, I think the more we can take care of our disease, our loved ones. And so I think we've really been very fortunate. And if you go to the website and look up the Parkinson's stuff, I send it to my friends all over, and they're so impressed by what we have accomplished. And they say, wow, Chitnis, pat on your back. And they say, don't pat me, go pat Shelly, because I basically do all the talking, and which is the easiest thing for me to do. But the real work that happens, as you all know, happens in the background. So let's give a big round of applause for Shelly. She truly has, empathy and compassion for people, and she really is a, true blue, good human being, and really partners with everybody, with patients, with administrators, with physicians, with industry partners, device companies, pharma partners, and she just is looking for any help that can be brought to patients with Parkinson's. And that, I think, is really what I wanted to do with my life. I can be in private practice and make $100,000 to $150,000 more, and buy a jet or buy a bigger car, and that's gonna give me momentary satisfaction. But what we do here, I think, gives us a lifetime of contentment that we're doing something good. So having said that, just as a background, does anybody know who described Parkinson's disease? Who first described Parkinson's disease? What do we call Parkinson's disease then? But
Mr. Parkinson.
that's the simplest answer. His name was James Parkinson, and he was I'm going to make this like a story so that you guys will remember this. So he was really an internist, and he lived in London and saw patients in his clinic, but also stood in his balcony and really saw these people, and they were stooped over, and some people were shaking, or some people were basically were not swinging their arms, or they were shuffling. And so he literally wrote up this in Old English. If you basically can't sleep at night and really want to read something that's very tough, and then read Old English, and it's called it's an essay on the shaking palsy, which is what palsy is really paralysis, and actually one of the names for Parkinson's disease is also paralysis agitans, and sometimes I'll put that as a diagnosis because the easiest thing to pick, and the patient who's having paralysis, stroke, no, it's also called paralysis agitans, and agitans is because people would look at patients and think that they were agitated and hence they were shaking. So these terminologies kind of come out, and we think they kind of don't make sense, but I think there is some method to madness in everything. And so many years later, after James Parkinson described this disease, another neurologist called Charcot said, we should call this, we should give credit where it's due, and we should call it Parkinson's disease, and hence, it's basically called that. And then, do you know what they used to use to treat Parkinson's disease in the 18th and the 19th century? What medication or chemical they used to use?
Opium.
Opium? We can use opium for pretty much everything, but not directed towards reaching. They used to use this thing, it's called belladonna alkaloids is what they used to use, and they had, they basically had properties that they blocked a neurochemical called acetylcholine, and in the brain, there is a balance between levels of acetylcholine. These are two neurochemicals, so acetylcholine and dopamine. There is a very good balance, and then so when the levels of dopamine start to fall because the nerve terminals that are making dopamine are dying, then the levels of it's not like the levels of acetylcholine are more. It's just that the balance is the differential changes, and therefore people start to have tremors, and essentially if you block acetylcholine, then you can block tremors. But we know that patients with Parkinson's disease have tremor, but what else do they have? What are the two other symptoms that they have?
Balance issues.
Balance issues, but what are the three main things?
Shuffling.
Huh?
Slow movement.
Bradykinesia or slowness, right? And what's the third thing? Rigidity, so stiffness, right? So basically shaking or tremor, slowness or bradykinesia. Brady is slow, kinesia is slow movement, and then rigidity is like stiffness. Those are three things, and then of course balance issues, develop for the most part later in the course of the disease. There are some, there is a couple of forms of Parkinsonism where balance can be affected early in the progression of the disease, but really, tremor, slowness, and stiffness, right? So the belladonna alkaloids would help with the tremor, but people who had, there are people that have a tremor, predominant Parkinson's, where tremor is the main symptom. They're not so slow, not so stiff, but then in most people, they have a combination of all of the three. So then, basically, for many years, that was basically what was used. And then, dopamine was a chemical that was actually discovered long time ago, in maybe the early 1920s, but never came up to where it could be studied in human patients, right? And so, do you know what happened in 1920? There is a big event that happened in 1920, which raised a lot of awareness about this disease.
Spanish flu. Spanish flu.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, so it's basically called von Economo's encephalitis. It was brain infection we don't know exactly, which particular virus, maybe it's like the flu virus, and this, but do you know how the Spanish flu is different from Parkinson's? Like, what is the difference? So the Spanish flu also results in Parkinsonism, so tremor, slowness, stiffness. But why is it different from Parkinson's disease?
A different protein, it affects a different, Parkinsonism affects the tau protein or something?
No, not that. I mean, no, it's okay. It's really important that we think, right? So I'll tell you why it's different. So in people with Parkinson's disease, the nerve terminals that make dopamine, they die slowly. Like, they die over decades. So people who develop, let's say this is 2022, somebody that is diagnosed with Parkinson's disease in 2022 could have lost their sense of smell 20 years ago, could have developed constipation of no reason at all 20 years ago, could have developed a sleep disorder where they're acting out their dreams 10 years ago, and could have developed depression for no reason at all. Everything's good, I make $1 million, I drive a Ferrari, I own a plane, everything, and I'm depressed. And so it's like, so it's biological, and it's all neurochemical, and so people can develop these. And so the progression of this disease and the cell terminals that are dying. And do you know what percentage of the dopamine neurons die before we manifest the first physical symptom of Parkinson, motor symptom? Do you know what that percent is?
About 80%?
No, so 80% dopamine, but it's about 50 to 60%. So you may, by the time you first somebody notices and says, why are you not moving your arm, or your hand is really small? Like many, so slowly, reducing dopamine, losing dopamine terminals, and then bang, you come to the edge of the cliff and you fall and you have Parkinson's now, right? But the medication-induced Parkinson's or chemical-induced Parkinson's or the Spanish flu or Parkinson's, the von Economo encephalitis was like one shot. You basically destroyed all the nerve terminals that made dopamine. So you're done. Like it's not a slow dying back from that. So that was the difference. But has anybody seen a movie called Awakenings?
What?
Awakenings?
Awakening?
Yeah.
Robin
Awakenings.
Who's in that?
Huh?
Robin
It's
Williams.
Robin Williams, it's Robert De Niro. Those are the two main characters. So Oliver Sacks wrote this book, and so if you haven't seen it, please see it. It's about the von Economo's encephalitis and about all these really young kids that basically suddenly got the flu and became frozen, and people didn't know what to do with them, and they literally put them in nursing homes, and then this guy, Robin Williams' character, comes and he figures this out, and then he starts to give them dopamine, and nothing happens. And he says, no, I think the problem is with dopamine. He goes to, it's a very, very comical scene where he goes to the pharmacist and says, okay, give me a few more grams. And the pharmacist says, that's a lot. And he says, goes and gives it to the patient, nothing happens. He says, give me a few more grams. And you can see the heap of, the dopamine just piling on. And then finally he reaches that critical mass, and lo and behold, people start waking up, and that's why it's called awakenings. Now let me tell you that you cannot get dopamine into the brain. And why is that?
Across the blood.
Correct. So dopamine by itself will not cross the blood-brain barrier. So then what did we do to dopamine so that it crosses over? Speak up. You're right. Correct. So we did a chemical modification and made it a L-isomer, and it's called levodopa or L-dopa. So L-dopa is lipid soluble. It goes through the membranes, goes into the brain, and but what would happen to levodopa in the gut and the blood? What happens to it? Like what would are there any enzymes that would break it down? So the answer is yes. If you give levodopa by itself, there are some enzymes that will just break it down in the periphery, and then you don't have, you've lost all the dopamine. That's why we added another medication or chemical along with levodopa, which now allows it to not be broken down in the periphery, but instead go into the brain. So what is that compound?
Carbidopa.
Carbidopa. Correct. So carbidopa and levodopa together, and what is the commonest brand name? Levodopa carbidopa is called Sinemet. You know what Sinemet stands for? Sinemet stands for sine, no, emesis. no emesis. So when you gave somebody, this is all very scientific. If we learn this like a history and like a story, it all becomes very easy. Of course, it only took me about 25 years to be able to bring this level of clarity to it. But that's what it is. It's like no emesis. So if you give somebody dopamine, that it would not cross the blood-brain barrier, it would drop the blood pressure, and it would make people barf. And so having carbidopa now allowed 80 to 90% of levodopa to basically go, but patients do certain things that does not allow the levodopa to go into the brain appropriate quantities. So what are some of those things that patients do that they should not be doing? Correct. Okay. If you take it with food, now I will say in all humility that I have patients who basically say that their levodopa works best when they take it with food. And for them I say, so be it. But for most patients, we say, take it, what should you take this medicine with? You're so smart. You should take it, why should you take 8 ounces or more? So why 8 ounces? Why am I fixated on 8 ounces or more? You have to speak up. You are not doing your speech exercises. I'm going to have to tell your doctor. Huh? Correct. So you put your medicine here, right? So it goes in esophagus, all the way stomach, small intestine, all the way here, and large intestine. So to go from here to here, okay? What is the one, if you were asked, what is the one symptom that is synonymous with Parkinson's? Just one. What is that? Not rigidity. Slowness. Parkinson's is a hypokinetic, slow moving, right? Everything in Parkinson's is slow. So imagine that the transit through the gut is also slow. So, as it is, the transit through the gut is slow. What is one non-motor symptom that almost all patients with Parkinson's have? I talked about it. I said this. You could develop this 20 years ago. What is that? Constipation, right? So we're enrolling you into my fellowship. So constipation, right? So as it is, they have constipation, right? The transit is slow. If you don't take it with a lot of water, it's not gonna get to the gut. On top of that, if you don't wait a whole hour before you eat, it's like the perfect storm, right? The poor cinnamon, it's here, can't get to the gut, competition with food or protein, and so much constipation. So what happens to the patient? You're sitting there, you're waiting to be turned on, and you're just sitting there, and your medicine, and then you're like, I'm frozen, I can't get done. Of course, this is where when you're a little bit more advanced. But even patients with early Parkinson's, it's like, oh, I'm shaking, and my medicine's not kicking in. And so people come to me and say, levodopa doesn't work for me. Can you give me another medicine? So I'm like, okay, let's get back to the drawing board. How do you take your medicine? How much water do you drink? Or then the spouse says, oh, he just drinks like a sip. I'm like, okay, there you go. Big number one. And then, how many times do you have a poop during the week? Twice or thrice, big number 2, right? And then, so it's like, and then how much time do you wait before, you eat your food? Oh, I eat right away. There you go, 3 problems. I said, so all these 3 problems, okay, go away for a week, send me a MyChart message, and let me know. And then I get a MyChart message, oh, my levodopa works! Dr. Chitnis, you're such a miracle worker. No, I'm not. It's just science, right? I'm not a miracle worker. So these things are important. Like, like I said, there is no 100% rule. There are enough patients that I know that will say, like, that have all the constipation in the world, don't drink water, eat all the food, and their medicine works. Go figure, okay? But for the most part, I think that it is really important to do this, the right way, right? And now, is anybody ever going to forget this? But if I sat here and showed you a PowerPoint and gave you a lecture, I bet you would go home and forget, right? Huh? Maybe she wouldn't forget, but I would forget. So, but if you have logic that you attach to everything, right? I'm a scientist, so I like logic. But I will tell you a joke. My husband and my daughter always laugh at me because they say mom can figure out the most complex problems in the world, but cannot do the simplest things. So I was sick this week, and I was, everybody kept saying, take a COVID test, take a COVID test. We have home COVID test. I opened it, I looked at it, I tried to read through it. I couldn't figure out for the heck of me how to do this test. And of course I was sick, so my brain wasn't working either. And I kept saying, I can't do this damn COVID test. I'm an MD and a PhD. And here comes, my friendly neighborhood Spider-Man, that's my 18-year-old daughter, and basically, pulls up some thing on YouTube, and literally 3 minutes later, she's like, Mom, I'm gonna do your test. She comes in, she swabs my nose, she does the test, 15 minutes later, negative, right? I got coffee. While I was coming here, I got coffee, and they couldn't fit the lid on the thing. They just put it on there, and I was going to get in the car. And I literally spent 12 minutes trying to fit a lid on the car. So, it's like my family is always laughing at me that you can solve all the complex problems of the world, but you cannot do these simple things. So what I tell people is I have medical skills, but I have zero life skills. What's a age range when people normally develop Parkinson's?
Say that question again.
Age range. What is the age group that develops Parkinson's?
Later in life.
Right, but give me a number.
60.
60s. Okay, so if you look in the literature and then look at textbook, it's like 60s, right? But I will tell you, and then of course 70s and 80s, I think that 90s is, if you don't develop Parkinson's by the time you're 90s, you probably won't, I think the incidence of new cases kind of goes down beyond that. But it is a disease of aging, and if somebody were to say what's one proven risk factor for developing Parkinson's disease, what would you say? Age. Age is one proven risk factor. Okay, but unfortunately, our environment has gotten so bad, right? We're all driving these cars and all these emissions and all these chemicals that and that we're making. We're making what's his name, Jeff Bezos rich because they're selling us organic food which apparently doesn't have chemicals. And I just come home and I say to my husband, you know what? You buy nice vegetables, you buy them fresh. Wash the heck out of them. Like you do not pay 3.5 times for organic food. Like I'm a doctor, I make decent amount of money. Yet I think there's logic, right? You just wash the food. Okay. So, but we do see a lot of young onset. I see people in the the 40s and 50s, But if I see somebody in the 30s and 40s, then what do you think my brain thinks? 30s and 40s. What am I thinking? What is the cause? Am I fast? Can everybody understand me? Should I slow down? Slow down. Okay. Who said that?
Chemical.
Somebody said that.
What?
Somebody said the word.
Genetic.
Genetic, right. So if you are in your 30s and your 40s and but also I would ask about family history, do you have it? But again, depending on the pattern of inheritance, you may not always find a family history. So, so basically, but 30s and 40s, I would think genetic, right? And when I was in fellowship, we used to tell people, because when somebody got diagnosed with Parkinson's, their first question was like, when am I going to die? And then the second question is, are my kids going to get it, right? These were like the standard questions that I got. And I say, am I going to die? And I'm going to say the answer is yes, but not right now. We are all going to die, but maybe 30 years later. And are my kids going to get it? And the answer is to me, it's not a genetic disorder. But now what we tell people is up to 10 to 20% of Parkinsonism could be because of a genetic mutation. And so if, and you don't have to be just young onset, there are some genes that are older onset also, but if there is a strong family history, or younger age, then, we can test for it. Should we do genetic testing for these people? Yes or no?
What's the benefit? No.
Good question. What's the benefit? The answer is not no anymore. And you know why? If you had asked me 20 years ago, I would have said, yeah, don't waste your money. But today, I would not say that. And can anybody tell me why?
Better drugs?
Yes, because there are now medications that are, so the commonest mutation is something that's called LRRK2, LRRK2, right? One of the Google founders, his mother has Parkinson's and he has a LRRK2 mutation. But the pattern of inheritance is such that he is at a higher risk of developing it but it's not 100% penetrant, meaning it is not that he will get the disease. He's just at a higher risk because there is a genetic mutation. So this is a kinase, it's a protein, and there are companies that are developing medications that will block the kinase. So if you block that kinase, then you don't have abnormal proteins, which means that you could. So, Michael Oken is a good friend of mine. He's an international expert. He works at University of Florida. He's the department chair now. And I asked him one of the days when we were at a meeting, and I said, "Hey, Mike, what do you think? Do you think in your and my lifetime, we're both in our early to mid 50s, and will we find a cure for Parkinson's disease?" And he looked at me and he thought of it. He said, "Maybe for genetic forms." So maybe for genetic forms, And the reason for that, because people always ask me, like, you're an MD, PhD, you're a scientist, this and that, why haven't you found a cure for Parkinson's? So my answer for that is basically, I'm not a basic researcher, so hence number one is that. And number two real reason is, to this day, we still do not know what the culprit is, right? In December of 2019, when people started falling sick, and then people started falling sick in the US, and then we basically did a test, and we basically said, oh, you are COVID-19 positive, hence you have, a coronavirus disease, right? It's not like that. We haven't figured that out. Has anybody figured that out? Here's your test, here's your lab test, and you have Parkinson's. So we don't know, what is we suspect certain things, but we don't know what is that. When does the disease start, right? What triggered it off? Like, I would be sitting here and something in my brain is just degenerating and I don't know, right? What is the trigger that caused the cells to slowly start dying? So that is really important that we don't know what triggers it off, right? And we don't know, so it could be many things, right? What do you think are the culprits? Like, if I had to pick a culprit, what would you put your money on?
Pesticides?
Pick a what?
Diet?
Culprit. Pick a culprit. Yeah. So yes. So I would say environment.
Environment,
Yeah.
chemicals,
Yeah.
exposure
Right.
to
Right.
chemicals.
So it can be, it can be pesticides, insecticides. There's a number of chemicals. I kind of spend a lot of times. I say in the U.S. I'm from southern Louisiana. And what's the thing that people like to do in southern Louisiana? They like to do a couple of things. What are some things that people do in southern Louisiana? They're all the time in the world. What do they do? That too. But what activities? That these are like some fun activities that people like to indulge in.
Fish?
Fish.
Eating fish.
People like to shoot animals, and people like to fish. And then all of these rivers and ponds and things where their fish are, what do they have? They have algae, they have plants, they have weeds. So what do? Weed killer. So they put weed killers in these waters to kill the weeds so that people can go and fish. But unfortunately, those chemicals get inside the fish, and then we cook the fish and we eat them, and then it gets inside us, and lo and behold, that happens. But does every person that eat fish in Louisiana end up developing Parkinson's? No. Why?
You have to be predisposed to it?
Correct. So some of us, will have a propensity where our blood-brain barrier is more permeable to chemicals. So that could be genetic, and some of us it's not permeable. So the example I give is, if I fumigate here with a known pesticide, all of us sitting here, all of us eventually end up developing Parkinson's. And the answer is no. First, that you would have to fumigate with a very high dose, which means you would pass out and die. But if you're chronically exposed to insecticides, some people will develop it and some people won't. And that's because some people's brains are more permeable. So that's why there's a group of people, Michael Oken, Ray Dorsey, and some people that really are trying to ban chemicals, ban pesticides. That is, so can we, if we cannot figure out what causes Parkinson's, but we know it's the environment, can we make the environment better, right? And so in some sense, electric cars are perhaps like, my husband always keeps telling me he wants to buy a Tesla, and I say no, because I'm worried. Like, one guy, their Tesla exploded and they died, and I said, somebody contributed to the statistics, I don't want it to be you, and so I forbid him from buying a Tesla. But he says, but you're making the environment bad and you're the Parkinson's doctor. So, you know, my family is supposed to be on my side, but they're always against me, you know. So technically, if we had electric cars, like, you know, could our environment be better? And the short answer is yes, but, you know, I don't necessarily want to make Elon Musk and other people rich. So, you know, I'm kind of on the fence at this point. Okay. Moving forward, so we talked about genetics. So, you know, I think we need to think about genetic testing, because there's another gene that's called, you know, GBA, or glucocerebrosidase, and it causes actually a disease called Gaucher's, but it also causes Parkinson's and can also cause dementia with Lewy bodies. So they are finding these chemicals that modulate this enzyme, you know, GBA is the enzyme, and so that would help with genetic forms of Parkinsonism. And these things are in trial now. They are in trial now. So we need to, you know, if somebody really has a younger onset or strong family history, that we need to talk to our physician about, would genetic testing be good for me? And a lot of people tell you don't waste the money. But, you know, what I do is I refer them to genetic experts within our university who thoughtfully sit down with them, take, you know, when I ask the history, because with the amount of time I have, did your mother have Parkinson's, your father have Parkinson's? No. Did your grandfather have? I'm done, right? They start from, like, you know, the first human that was ever born on the earth and trace out the family tree to figure out, did somebody have something, right? And then they decide based on that whether we should test for, you know, for genes. And I have patients who have GBA, I have patients who have LORD2, I have patients who have PINK1, which are, you know, younger onset. And I think that these things are important. You know, in 2022, I have to say that, you know, it's no longer about dopamine. I think we need to get out of the dopamine story and dwell deeper. We need to think about molecular things. We need to think about genetics, because, you know, all of the dopamine-based therapies we know work, right? Tremor gets better, slowness gets better, stiffness gets better. But are we slowing down the progression of the disease? No, right? We've at least tested 20 plus chemicals for, you know, the Parkinson study group. NIH has tested at least these many chemicals in the past 20 years since I started fellowship. And you know how many neuroprotective agents we have in 2022? How many? Zero again. We have zero neuroprotective agents. We have spent gazillion dollars and not found a disease that's so, you know. Is there anything that, if you were a Parkinson's doctor and you had to tell your patient, if you do this, it could probably slow down the course of your disease? What would that be?
Change your diet.
Exercise. It's exercise.
Exercise.
Exercise. Exercise. Good.
Yeah.
So I would say exercise. You know, when you exercise, it does a number of things. So of course it makes you physically better, right? You tone your muscles, you know, it helps you balance. But exercise causes, thank you so much, causes the release of certain growth factors in the brain that can preserve the dopamine terminals so that they do not die at the pace at which they are dying. They're dying slowly, yet, you know, so I would say exercise, you know, and I mean, can I tell you like which exercise is the best? And, you know, I don't think so. I think any form of exercise is good. Now, the cardiologist will tell you you got to get your heart rate to a certain thing and stuff. Yeah, but you know, if you are like 40 years of age or even my age, that's good. But you know, as smart as our friend here is, I couldn't put her on a treadmill and say, you know, why don't you run 4 miles in 30 minutes and get your heart rate up? That couldn't happen, right? So we have to try to do what we can, right? So get on a stationary bike, go for a walk. Even if you go with a walker, go for a walk, you know, do something. Anybody can do light lift. You know, you can sit here and you can do 2 pounds. You can do, you know, you can do all kinds of exercises sitting down. You can do all kinds of, you can put weights, you know, on your ankles and do all kinds of exercises. So, you know, to me, there is like zero excuse for, you know, not doing exercise. And what I tell patients now that, you know, now that I can preach because I practice what I preach, you know, I said, you know how many hours I work? I work like 12-hour long days, right? And then, you know, I sometimes go home and cook. Now, finally, thanks to my husband, we have somebody that cooks for us, but I still cook because my kid just wants to eat what, you know, mom made. So, you know, I go home at 6:30, I cook, and, you know, 30 minutes a day, no matter what I'm doing, I still find time to do some form of exercise. Whether I go for a walk, whether I, just work in the yard, whether I cook, I just keep moving, right? And so I think the key is just keep moving. And if you move, what else moves? Your bowels move. People that have constipation, I make them walk more, suddenly they're not that constipated. Drink a lot of water and keep moving, and constipation is better. Of course, you can take Miralax and eat fiber and eat prunes and eat vegetables. And diet is not, the answer is not entirely wrong. I think, we should all have good diet that, helps. And I mean, there are many diets, and people basically say that the Mediterranean diet is perhaps the best, but it's a very sensible diet. What should we all be eating? Fruits, right? Vegetables, right? Grains, lean meats, fish, right? I mean, this is that we all should be eating so that we're not, we're staying healthy and we're not raising our cholesterol and not getting diabetes, right? Those kinds of things. So I say sensible diet, and here's an important thing. Patients with Parkinson's should not stop eating protein. That's the worst thing you'll do to yourself. When you're older, you actually need protein, right? You just have to distribute your protein. So sometimes I'll say, when do you need to be most active? When are your exercise classes? Some people will say, I go in the morning. And I say, okay, so then you eat your protein at night for your dinner, because then even if your levodopa doesn't kick in to that extent, you're kind of getting ready for bed, and if you're a little slow, it's okay, right? You eat your protein, you figure out you eat maybe more carbs and more fruits and vegetables at breakfast and lunch, and then maybe you eat your chicken and fish and steak or whatever more at dinner time. But you can still try to separate it by an hour, and that would be helpful. Okay, everybody with me? All right.
Well, separate it. What are we separating?
So if you take your levodopa at 6 p.m.,
Okay.
then you eat after 7 p.m. One of the mistakes that people do is that they will say, oh, I ate at 12 p.m. and then I took my medicine at 1 p.m. But the question is, when did you stop eating? It's not when you started eating, right? So if you started eating at 12 and you stopped eating at 12:30 and you took your levodopa at 1 o'clock, you only have 30 minutes. So you have to, I do understand that it's a bit of an imposition to be able to be tied to these things. But unfortunately, if you're diabetic, if you have certain diseases where the plasma levels of the medicines is important and is linked to certain things, the more disciplined you are, the best bang you're going to get out of the buck. So you just have to. But I'll say that if your friend comes from out of town or somebody calls you to go out to lunch and you have half an hour instead of an hour, it's okay. But the problem is sometimes people may freeze. So they go to the restaurant, they took their medicine and then just ate 30 minutes, didn't absorb enough. So everybody has to just tune your brain and plan your activities. I think it just takes a bit of planning and discipline. That's all it is. Okay.
Was it always protein that you shouldn't eat with your levodopa, or is it
It's
other
any
foods?
food. It's really any
So
food.
it's not protein.
Yeah, protein more. And you know why protein? Because if you break down levodopa, it forms amino acids. If you remember your biochemistry from way back when, levodopa is amino acids, protein is amino acids. They're both amino acids. They're competing at the gut. Protein is a larger quantity. It gets absorbed. Levodopa doesn't get absorbed. You don't get an on response, or you get a slow, lesser on response. So that's but any food, that's very important. So who do you think is more likely to get Parkinson's, men or women? I mean, it's gonna be like 50-50 toss. So it's going to be either men or women. It's men. So it's 2%, 2 per 100, and 1.3. And when we were in med school, I remember hearing these statistics, and one of the med students says, for once life is fair to women. They're like, men get higher, because of, women get a lot of diseases also. But yeah, so they're higher for men. And then, but as you age, I think it probably equalizes, it comes, So, okay. All right. And so we talked about, risk factors, pesticides, we talked about, brain injury. Like, for example, people that have had brain injury, that did boxing, or that did basically, football, really contact sports, and had head injury, they may be at a higher risk because there is shearing injury to part of the brain that's called substantia nigra, which makes dopamine. It's not, the pathophysiology is not similar to the garden variety Parkinson's, but head trauma can put you, at a risk. Okay. So what are some of the things that we either drink or we use as recreational things that could reduce your risk of developing Parkinson's?
Coffee.
Coffee. What's the other thing?
Oh, red wine.
Drink
That
red
seems
wine.
to be the be all.
Yeah, I think red wine is a cure. Red wine, chocolate, and coffee are a cure. When I'm your age, I'm gonna be sitting in my wheelchair and I'm gonna be like, sipping. I'm not gonna drive. If I'm encephalopathic, I'm in a chair. I don't care. But you didn't hear that from me. So what else? What is a recreational thing that people do that could potentially reduce developing Parkinson's? I don't recommend it, but we just found it. Huh? Smoking. Not pot, but
Oh, but smoking cigarettes?
smoking. So what has been
Reduces?
found in
That's what you
epidemiological
say,
studies is that people who drink caffeine and people who smoke, are at a
Stimulants.
lower risk. But you can drink coffee. Be careful how much you drink. I don't recommend anybody to smoke. But is it nicotine that is preventive, or is it something else? I don't think we have a perfect answer for that. I just got into the habit of drinking a lot of coffee. I was in med school, and in med school, everybody drinks tea. So we used to drink lots and lots and lots of tea. Like we literally had IV tea into our, But then I came to grad school in America, and then everybody was drinking coffee. So then I switched from tea to coffee, but I still miss tea. So I'm an equal opportunity consumer of tea and coffee. But smoking and caffeine, could be. And they are actually, they did a clinical study where they wanted to see if caffeine could be neuroprotective. But instead, what they found is that people that took caffeine had better motor scores. So so they are studying caffeine as a drug, so to say. So you said smoking pot. What about cannabis? This is a question that I always get asked. Like CBD oil, cannabis. What's everybody's experience, or what are your thoughts on that? Tell me when you want me to stop and do questions, because I can go on for another maybe 7 more hours.
Well, that's not a stimulant, so that's not lining up with your cigarettes or your coffee, so I would think that wouldn't be a good thing.
Yeah, so I think the short answer is I'm not sure anybody knows, and I think they're actually going to do clinical trials with CBD oil, because I believe 38 out of 50 states is legal now, is what I read. I'm just looking up some stats. My patients who use CBD oil, what they tell me is they sleep better, they have less pain, their tremor is better. So, things that I have heard from people. But if somebody says to me, will you write, if it became legal in Texas, would you write me a prescription? And I would say no. Because, remember that there is a reason why we do randomized, clinical trials, right? The reason we do clinical trials, and I can stop after that and we can take some questions. The reason we do clinical trials is because anything that, seems safe. I'm a pharmacologist, my PhD was in pharmacology. Everything just boils down to one thing and one thing alone, and that is dose. So, so basically something could be phenomenal at 5 milligrams and could be poison at 50 milligrams, right? So it's dose related. So when we do clinical trials, we do them in many phases. So we do phase 1, and phase 1 is really not even patients. It's just basically volunteers that get administered the drug, and we're just talking about safety and tolerability. Phase 2 is smaller number of patients, maybe like 50 patients, and they're looking for dose, but also efficacy, like finding at what dose would symptoms be better. And then phase 3 is basically, and so there are phase 2As and 2Bs. 2B is kind of like a mini phase 3, but phase 3 is when they have hundreds of patients, or even thousands of patients where they will test the medication, the dose, and then they'll monitor for efficacy, but they monitor for side effects and things like that. And they always compare it to something that's called placebo or the sugar pill, right? Because if all I did is just give the drug and it worked, in Parkinson's clinical trials, there is this very strong placebo benefit that results in improvement. And we see this in people, that basically get brain surgery. Just knowing that they are going to get an intervention that is going to work probably releases endorphins or something that they are better. And so you have to compare it to a sugar pill that does nothing. So if you have 50 patients on a sugar pill, 50 patients on a medication, you compare their motor scores and the medication people are really better compared to the placebo, then you can say that, hey, this thing really works. And the studies are always double blind, meaning the patient doesn't know whether they get the sugar pill or they get the drug, and the physician involved in the clinical trial also does not know. And that way, because you have to take out all bias. What is really important, equipoise and altruism is very important in clinical studies. And if that does not exist, then we will come up with things that are not really good medications. We don't know what their side effects are. So, do I know what the long-term effects of, taking cannabis are on somebody? I do not. There is a doctor, she's a pharmacist, her name is Amy Placing. I think she lives in town, and she does a fantastic lecture. I think if you go to the Parkinson's Voice Project website and look at the educational series, I think there is a lecture by Amy, and she really talks about these things. She talks about, just herbs, or homeopathy or whatever. I just read an article last night where, there is a plant that's called Mucina pruriens, which has, it's a bean and it has dopamine in it. And some of my patients will say, I don't want to take levodopa, why don't I just take those beans? And what they found out is that depending on which plant it is, you cannot say how many milligrams of levodopa are in plant 1, plant 2, plant 3, and what they found is in some it was like 0, in some it was maybe 5 milligrams, and in some it was 250 milligrams. So, so I think that the best thing to do is use a regulated levodopa carbidopa, where I know for sure I'm giving you 100 milligrams. If you do everything correctly, you'll at least absorb 90% and get full benefit. So, I think randomized controlled clinical trials are very important for safety, but also, to know that it's true efficacy, like, does it really work? All right.
My mom has both Parkinson's and Alzheimer's. I'm wondering if you would mind speaking about the loss of smell, because that seems to go along with both, and it was something that we didn't know until after she was diagnosed. And I'm wondering if there are studies that sort of explain why that happens, or why that's such a common
Yeah. I mean,
Could you repeat the question?
Yeah, I will repeat the question. So she said, my mom has Parkinson's and Alzheimer's, but she lost her sense of smell, and can you explain why? Okay, so so there again, the olfactory epithelium, right, has dopamine containing neurons. So dopamine containing neurons are not just in the brain, they are in other parts as well. So the olfactory epithelium has dopamine containing neurons, and so you are losing the dopamine neurons everywhere. So essentially, now there is a hypothesis, because we still do not know what causes Parkinson's. So there is a hypothesis which is like, is it something that goes, is it a chemical or a virus or a bacteria that goes up like this? Or is it something that we eat that goes into our gut, that changes our gut flora, that causes abnormal folded protein that then goes to the brain? So we don't know, so it's a dual hit hypothesis, so to say. So you lose the olfactory epithelium.
She lost that like years before.
Correct.
Yeah.
And because remember, like, let's say that there is a chemical A that has been proven to cause Parkinson's, and I was exposed to it 20 years ago. And because this is a slowly degenerative process, so you're slowly losing dopamine neurons and what they think is you really actually start here. You lose the olfact, so there is a pathologist called Brack and Brack. So there's a husband and wife. They are in Germany, and they basically looked at brains of patients with Parkinson's, and they followed this structure that is called Lewy body. So Lewy body, so the cells that die, they're dead, but the cells that do not die, they have this pathological structure that's called Lewy body, and inside Lewy body is this abnormally folded protein that is called alpha-synuclein, which is involved in the apparently in the pathogenesis of Parkinson's. And so essentially what they found out is that the degeneration may be starting in the olfactory epithelium, and then it rises slowly, and then it comes to a part of the brain that's called brainstem, and it affects a nucleus that's called vagus that's responsible for gut transit. And so when that happens, then people basically get constipation. But in the brainstem area, there is brainstem is where the REM behavioral disorder, the rapid eye movement behavioral disorder starts. So people may have that, and similarly, the serotonin neurons or the norepinephrine neurons are all in the brainstem, and that's why people end up getting depression. So it is a rising, pathogenesis, and therefore you lose a sense of smell, you become constipated, you could become depressed, you have the sleep disorder, and so on and so forth, and then it keeps rising, and it comes to substantia nigra. So, clinically, when we diagnose people, when we say, oh, you have stage 1, so there is a clinical staging that's called Hone and Yar that was described by 2 people. One of them is a woman, I forget which one, I think Yar is a woman. No, I think Hone is a woman, Melvin Yar is a guy. So they describe the staging. So you have one side, then you have the second side, then you have midline symptoms, then you have more balance issues, then you have more non-motor symptoms, and then stage 5 when it's then you're bedbound, right? So but stage 1 of Hone and Yar is actually stage 3 of Brack. So you're already ahead with the pathological staging. You've lost these neurons, and you have these pre-motor or pre-clinical symptoms that manifest. And so, I think so then people have tried to study, patients with idiopathic, meaning no reason at all constipation, idiopathic REM behavioral disorder, and followed their course to see, and the risk of developing neurodegenerative disorder with REM behavioral disorder is pretty high, either Parkinson's or atypical. So that's why they lose the sense of smell, because it could be starting right with the losing the dopaminergic neurons in the olfactory epithelium.
Thank you.
What percentage of your patients or Parkinson's patients develop dementia, and how does that present typically?
Yeah, so dementia is pretty high. I think if people live into their 80s and 90s, it probably would be almost 80% or more. So it's a pretty high percentage. So age is a risk factor for Parkinson's, but it's also a risk factor for developing dementia. So there's many kinds of dementia. So there is, of course, the Alzheimer's kind, where the protein there is tau, and the protein in Parkinson's is called alpha-synuclein. The presentation of patients with Parkinson's dementia is that they basically, their executive function, so insight, judgment, being able to multitask, being able to get the words out of their mouth. It takes them longer time. They know what they're thinking, but to connect the dots, so that is like kind of the cognitive issues that patients develop. Memory is not one of the first things. It's more the executive functions that are basically lost. With Alzheimer's, it is mostly memory. Like most people with Alzheimer's will be like, oh, I was supposed to go home, I took a wrong turn, I forgot where I'm going. That's me on most days, but for people with Alzheimer's, that is how they are. Like I forgot, it's very simple things. So memory, because it's more the temporal and parietal lobes is where Alzheimer's kind of begins. But the dopamine is the deficiency of dopamine is felt at a structure that's called striatum, And so there are connections between the frontal lobe to the striatum, and that's why the executive functions are the ones that are first to go. But eventually they develop problems with memory, and then eventually they develop hallucinations, because the Lewy bodies keep spreading. So the Lewy bodies are spreading. They start here, they're in the brainstem, they're causing sleep issues, they're causing problems with REM behavioral disorder, then they cause motor symptoms, and then they're still rising. So the degeneration continues, and finally when it hits the cortex or the big brain, that's when you start to lose the higher functions. So, but so that's how Parkinson's dementia is. But there is a difference. There is dementia with Lewy bodies, which is different from Parkinson's disease dementia, because they develop cognitive functions much earlier compared to people with Parkinson's disease dementia, which develops generally later in the course of the disease. And so people with dementia with Lewy bodies will pathologically have a lot more Lewy bodies in their big brain compared to patients with Parkinson's dementia, the less. And in certain areas like visual cortex, that's why they end up getting hallucinations and things like that.
So doctor, if I could just go back to her comment, because I was unaware about the loss of smell. So her mother lost her sense of smell years ago. Would the doctor know to test? Is there a way then you're going, uh-oh, this could be early, onset, whatever, because my mom has dementia and the Parkinson's runs in the family, and my sister is going to see a neurologist. And I'm thinking here, I wonder if Lynn lost her sense of smell, or even my mom had years ago, and we didn't pick up on that.
Yeah, so that's a very interesting question. I think that most people would not know, and if they knew, they would mention it to their primary care doctor. And I'm not sure that primary care doctor would necessarily pick up on that and say, aha, my tube light went on, this is loss of smell, could this be Parkinson's premotor? And now if somebody lost their sense of smell, what would I do? I'm not sure that I would necessarily get a DAT scan, which is what we can get now. But like I said, DAT scan is just I don't use DAT scan to make the diagnosis of Parkinson's disease. I use clinical judgment. We use clinical criteria. Even in 2022, there are now some MRI features, there are some ultrasound features that could say that, but really it's the clinical criteria. And then, on top of that, if I saw something on MRI, if I saw something on ultrasound, or if I did the DAT scan, then I could say it just adds more evidence, But then what could I do? I don't have a neuroprotective agent. I mean, of course, I would, go to the gym and live in the gym and, exercise a lot and lose weight and be healthy and those kinds of things. But there is no neuroprotective agent at this point. So, there is some risk in trying to, of course people are wanting to diagnose, premotor Parkinson's, but then what do we do with it? We don't have a neuroprotective agent, right? So I think the bigger picture for all of us is that we should try to live as healthy a lifestyle as possible, and then, obviously got to have nature take its own course. But if you really exercise and you're, I have patients with Parkinson's that are very overweight, and I keep telling them, and there's a guy I know, love him dearly, but I've been telling him for 10 years, lose weight, lose weight, lose weight. At some point you'll lose balance, you'll start falling. It's a huge guy, he falls on the floor. They have to use a lift, they have to call the fireman to come pick him up because nobody can pick him up. So, so my message to somebody that gets diagnosed with Parkinson's, I said, there is no judgment here. We all, including myself, we all yo-yo with our weight, we all have these issues. But I think what we need to do is we need to really get onto a healthy lifestyle. We all like our food, we all like our cookies, but eat them on a Saturday, and this, again, they're my family jokes. My husband says, you have a cheat meal, then you have 2 cheat meals, then you have a cheat day, then you have a cheat weekend. It's it never ends, right? So we have to, I get no respect with my family. we have to basically just follow a very healthy lifestyle. Like, so the pandemic was very bad, but it was a eye-opener for everybody, including myself. I was like, you know what, I want to do this for a long time. I want to enjoy my life. It's a lot of weight. I still need to lose some more, but these are very healthy lifestyle, and it's made a huge difference, in how you feel, and then it prevents some of the disorders, right? If you're not overweight, and maybe you won't develop diabetes soon enough, right? I mean, or you may not develop, high cholesterol, things like that. But with Parkinson's, I think having good health right from the start is critical, because as the disease progresses, you're stiff, and if you're overweight, then it's much harder. Like like I say, without any judgment, and I'm the first one in interest of full disclosure to say we're all guilty, I'm guilty, we all do these things, but we need to really take good care of our health, and we need to really exercise and eat a good diet and sleep well. Like sleep is definitely one of my problems because I work so much, but that's what I would do. Really, But if we were to find a agent that would slow down the course of Parkinson's, like I said, for genetic testing, I think it's important to do genetic testing where it's relevant, because what if, you could be enrolling in a clinical trial, how are we going to enroll people into developing drugs for genetic Parkinsonism if we don't know who has it, right? So that's why doing genetic testing in certain patients is important.
Dr. Chitnis, what about the skin test that's available now?
Yeah, that's not 100%. So, the skin test basically looking for alpha-synuclein. They're using staining things to detect alpha-synuclein. And, if you have, I had somebody whose clinical diagnosis was very much Parkinsonism, and one of my fellows, that's a movement doctor in the community, sent that patient to me and said their skin test was negative. Do they have Parkinson's? And I said, so what? The skin test is not. There is a sensitivity and a specificity to a test. And we don't make the diagnosis of Parkinson's disease based on the skin test. I mean, what if there is some other disorder where alpha-synuclein manifests in the skin, or what if you have a negative skin test? If you clinically look like Parkinson's, I'm not going to say, oh my God, you clinically look like Parkinson's, but your skin test was negative. Forget that. I don't do that. I basically go with, what we have learned is still clinical diagnosis. So I basically say, okay, let's treat you with medication. Levodopa, fortunately, unfortunately, is like the standard of care, and but we don't start them on super high drug from the beginning. You titrate it, you do dose finding, you find that dose, and then they're better. And that's a therapeutic drug. They are better. They responded to levodopa. So I think I don't do the skin test, very honestly. I go with the clinical gut. Sometimes there are patients where you're not sure. They have essential tremor, but they're slightly slow. Like do they have arthritis? Hence they're slow, or is it too bradykinesia? I might do a DAT scan. Sometimes. But I really think that, and this is what I give the patient a choice. I say we have two choices. We can use a drug that we need to use. My chair of neurology where I trained used to say there is one drug that neurologists need to really use very well. What is that called? It's called the tincture of time. Neurological disorders progress. If it's a neurological disorder and a progressive disorder, in 3 to 4 months or 6 months, you will have additional symptoms. Is there any harm in diagnosing Parkinson's 6 months later? Not a huge harm. There is some evidence that if you treat very early, that maybe the quality of life later could be better. I don't know that there is huge amount of research on that, but the body may have certain compensatory mechanisms, and if you treat, maybe we preserve those compensatory mechanisms, and maybe the progression is slower. I don't know. It's speculation. But short answer is I don't use this.
I take 4 carbidopa and levodopa with each meal 3 times a day.
What is it?
Sorry, would you recommend not taking them with the meals?
No, you should not take it with the
I do
meals.
take it
It's
with the
only,
meals.
yeah, that's.
Once I'm asking, I can change.
Yes, you have to take it on an empty stomach, full glass of water, wait a whole hour before you eat anything. The only cases where I say you will have to take it with some food, be careful, sir. It is when people have nausea. If you have really bad nausea, because levodopa can certainly cause bad nausea. So if there is bad nausea, then I'll say take it with crackers, take it with, is that somebody else's or is that mine?
You can have that one here.
Thank you. So, I'll say nausea. There is a medicine, there used to be a medicine that Pfizer used to make, it's called Hygan, and they stopped making it. And that's very unfortunate. It's not available oral, it's only available intramuscular. And certainly I can't imagine giving somebody an intramuscular injection 4 times a day or for nausea. So then I'll say take it with crackers or take it with fruit, but don't take it with protein containing foods. So, do you see a movement doctor?
You say that, but
Do you see, is your physician a movement disorder neurologist?
I said woman,
No.
is my neurologist, that's a man.
No, my question is your, you don't have to tell me who they are. My question is your doctor a general neurologist or a movement disorder doctor like I am?
I would say a general neurologist.
Okay. So, so again, I'll say this in all.
He takes the Parkinson.
Huh?
Parkinson's is the main. drug.
Correct, but who can take care of Parkinson's disease? Any neurologist, right? Any neurologist. Who can take care of Parkinson's disease in the best possible manner? At the cost of, not being immodest, we spent 2 extra years training to become Parkinson's doctors. That's all I do. Now, if you come to me and say, I have MS and please take care of me, and I'll say, not really, because for 20 years I've been a Parkinson's doctor. Theoretically, I'm a board certified general neurologist. Can I treat MS? Yes. But can I treat it well? No. So, my suggestion is that if you have the ability to see a movement doctor, and at least see a movement doctor. If you don't want to travel to Dallas, you live far away, at least see a movement doctor once a year and then see your general neurologist, But you have to see, and I'm not trying to generate more business for us. Our tribe is very small, but I think for the patient care, I think seeing a movement disorder doctor is really important. So one of the things that patients develop is this thing called dystonia, right? Their hand turns or their foot turns, and they'll say, Dr. Chitnis, can you give me Botox injections? And I'll say, you need to get Botox injections, but I'm going to refer you. Because guess what? I don't do Botox for limbs. I do Botox for, neck and above. That's my area of expertise. I didn't train in limbs, so I'll send you to a doctor that can inject limbs. I think it's really important to, to segregate, to understand who's best, right? So that's all it's all about. It's not about my ego or anybody else's ego, right? It's about the patient. Taking the best care of the patient, and I think everybody deserves a quality of life. And the last thing I'll say is Parkinson's disease is a disease that can be very well managed. People can live a reasonably good quality of life with Parkinson's disease for a long time, if they do all the right things. And I say this, the day one that I diagnose somebody, some people listen, I will tell you, my best patients, not best as in I like them best, right? My patients who have done the best with Parkinson's are the ones, I have this guy, he has Parkinson's disease for 15 years, we kept thinking about DBS, 8 and 10 years ago. He was like, Dr. Chitnis, I do so well with medications. He just had DBS 15 years into the disease. It doesn't even look like he has Parkinson's. He exercises every day, he sleeps well, he eats well. I have so many people that are exercise fiends that do all the things right. I think their disease has slowed down because of that, So I think it's really, really important, I think, to do these things. We have enough evidence now. Exercise is your best friend. And grab your best friend and go to exercise. Well, guys, thank you so much.
Thank you.